Hello, hello, hello. Happy Monday. I hope you are all doing well. I know we're waiting for a few more to hop on live. I think maybe just one more. So in the meantime, let's check in with our feels today. As per the usual, I feel like we've gotten pretty used to this at this point. So let me know in the chat, one feeling word. Alyssa, that's a state. Can we go deeper? You're like, yeah, okay. So that's still kind of in the same vein. Brittany says optimistic. Annie says uncertain. Content, says Mel. If you're watching the recording, check in with how your feels are. Autumn says meh. Blah. Yeah, I feel that. It's interesting that we're kind of all in the same space. I will be incredibly transparent and say that I have had a pretty high anxiety day. So I'm coming at you, as always, fully unapologetically in my truth, which is that your girl's feeling anxious today for no reason too. I don't know if anyone else is, or like no tangible reason, if that makes sense. There's always something at the root, but sometimes we don't know what that something is. But I am really, really, really stoked to be here with all of you, especially because today feels like the culmination of so much work, frankly, and like unearthing that we've been doing together for the last 9 weeks. Has it been really? Fuck me. Like such like deep work. And it feels like it's been so long, and also like it's gone by so fast all at the same time. But this next month together, these next 4 weeks, is really all about embodying our fuck yes self through all of the tools of self-awareness, curiosity, and now in this last month, clarity that we've been building as the building blocks to be able to actually take action, right? Because as I said the first week, so often we are told and taught these action steps ahead of actually understanding ourself and our needs and our deepest, fullest, most expansive version of who we are and what we want. And when we take action from a place of uncertainty, those action steps are not, maybe we're magically hitting the nail on the head, but most of the time we are falling far, far, far from the mark, and we're missing it. And so we end up, this is why people end up in this life or this self that they don't recognize, and they feel really miserable or anxious or overwhelmed or all of these things that so many of us walked into this space 9 weeks ago feeling, right? And so why we've been doing this unearthing, and why we didn't start with action steps, even though there's been some sprinkled in along the way, is so that we could actually get to the intention and actions taking place with thoughtfulness, with intention. And so you can be taking action from a place of truth instead of a misalignment, right? So I just want to really celebrate you all for getting here, because yes, like the work now it's not like easy peasy lemon squeezy. Setting boundaries is something that we're all like, probably like, fuck me, it's this thing I struggle with the most. But I'd wager that a big part of why it is the thing that you've struggled with the most is because you didn't know what boundaries to set, because you were not in alignment with what you actually wanted. And so you were trying these things on for size, but you didn't know what you needed or what was important to you. And so it's really hard to stand for something when you don't know what that something is. So today we're going to be doing all that. But before we get to that, I would really love because I think something that we forget to do is celebrate ourselves and take stock along the way. And this is something that I will be encouraging a lot as we head into the next month. But I want to take a second before we step into this next month and last month together for you to really think. And I actually, if you have your journals present, I want to encourage you to brain dump for the next 5 minutes what you feel like has been the greatest area of growth and what have been your biggest aha moments in the last 2 months together before we step into the action steps. I just want us to, and this will be our grounding today. We won't do breath work or whatever, just to ground into our time together. So I'm going to mute myself and give you 5 minutes. If you want to play music, whatever works for you, feel free. And we'll reconvene in 5, okay? Hi, Heather. Welcome. We are just doing a quick grounding brain dump journaling. I'm going to post it in the comments so you can see what we're up to, okay? You guys need a couple more minutes. If you haven't quite finished, that's okay. You can always come back to it. But if you need a couple more minutes, I know some of you are done and some of you are still going. All right. Beautiful. I would love for each of you to just unmute yourself and share one of the things you wrote before we head into this next stage. Also, ahead of time, I apologize if my dogs are cuckoo pants bananas tonight. They are in gremlin mode right now. So if you hear them barking in the background, it's probably going to happen. All right, Mel, if you want to go first, since you're first on my Brady Bunch.
Sure. One of my biggest ahas is like how big my fear of abandonment is and like how that shapes a lot of my life. But then even despite that, I'm like still continuing to like try to pursue relationships and stuff like that. So that's my biggest thing right now.
Thanks for sharing. Annie, you're next on my Brady Bunch.
Can you hear me? I think one of my takeaways that I'm still kind of even just having an aha moment as I'm writing it down is like the difference between comparing myself to others and like putting energy towards cultivating what I want. So just working through that, the energy that it takes to like go through the feelings of the comparison, but then putting that towards, okay, cultivating that for myself. It's been huge for me.
Yeah, love that. Autumn.
I think my biggest is probably like trying to learn to listen to my body and listen and to learn how to trust myself and find safety in myself, and some of the embodiment stuff.
Yeah, that's a huge one. Brett.
For me, it was more or less learning to make sure I'm putting myself first before I start, filling up others' cups, fill up my own.
Alyssa.
Mine had to do with the embodiment as well. Just getting out of my comfort zone and just going all in and feeling it.
Thanks. Jessica.
Mine was learning to step back when I'm having thoughts that are overwhelming and realizing that a lot of those thoughts aren't coming from me. They're coming from that bitch, Becky, and she just needs to shut up.
Yeah. Becky the bitch. All right, and Heather.
Sorry, I don't know if you guys can hear me. I just disappeared. It just shut down on me for a sec. Sorry. So I wrote down a couple of things that stood out to me, and one of the like main underlying themes was really just moving through things and not just sitting in things. So I think that has been like a big takeaway for me. Like, okay, I'm feeling this. Let's move through it.
Yeah. And be sure, you guys, if you want to, throughout tonight, to utilize the Me Too comments, because we're going to be working through stuff together. And I know that sometimes we've gotten away from that. Thanks, Mel. Beautiful. Thank you for all of those shares. And I hope that writing that down gave you kind of a reminder of the work you've done and helped you celebrate with yourself. And obviously do more of that, like write more of that out, because I know 5 minutes isn't a lot of time to reflect on the work that we've done in the last 2 months together. But I wanted you to really reflect on what you have done, because setting boundaries is usually about where you still have work to do. And it is, I would argue, one of the hardest things that we can do, and yet one of the most important things that we can implement in order to continue to foster and strengthen our own self-trust. And a lot of people are like, well, why do you need boundaries? Boundaries are a shitty way to interact with other people. Like, I don't know if you've ever heard someone else say that, but I've definitely had that thrown at me before. And boundaries are not a bad thing. They're a beautiful thing that invites the other, if it's a relational boundary, that invites the other person into being able to create a better connection with you and consent-based experience in your dynamic. And with yourself, boundaries are huge in self-trust, which is, I believe, the biggest thread of being able to really embody your fuck yes self. Because if you don't trust yourself at the end of the day, right, you're not going to feel confident. You're not going to trust yourself to take the steps towards the life that you want and the human you know that you are at the end of the day. Which is why we started last week kind of stepping into the space of building that self-trust in a more tangible way with the very intensive embodiment experience, which I know most of you have done. I know some of you haven't gotten to yet, and that's totally fine. I really encourage you, if you have not done it yet, to please do it this week and share in the group, because it really does go hand in hand with the work that we're doing today. Last week was more about the body's incorporation, and this one is more about your brain. So, but you need both in order to have the courage, right? So it's not just one or the other. And that's why we're stepping into both. So what I would really like you to do is go back to the week that we talked about people pleasing in your notes. And if you don't have them in front of you or whatever, that's fine. You can rewrite them, because we're going to take a few seconds to kind of just remind ourselves of what we wrote down. But if you recall, we talked about the what, the how, and the why, right? And kind of the reverse, stepping into your why first. But under the how, we all wrote down a bunch of stuff, and we revisited this a couple of weeks ago too, and we were talking about communication. I want you to just reflect on the how statements that you wrote down and how your people-pleasing tendencies show up, okay? And write them down at the top of your page. If there's anything that you've also unearthed since you wrote those down, feel free to add that to your list. Okay, I'll give you guys a few minutes for that. Yeah, so Annie, what I asked is to rewrite at the top of your page the how section of your people pleasing week, or when we went back to communication. So it was like how that tends to show up, right? So we did what brings out your people pleasing tendencies, and then the next step was diving into the how. So some of my examples were, I don't speak my needs. I put my self-care on the back burner. I overbook myself. I think I recall that being one of yours, that kind of stuff. All right, when you've written them all out, give me your eyeballs. Okay, we're pretty much at everybody. So we shall move on. Okay, so before we get to the next step, which is going to be kind of like a workshop-y situation, to start with your instincts, and then we'll kind of workshop through and make sure that the scenarios we're talking about specifically, we can get really clarity around how to actually really step into setting boundaries, because there is kind of a formula attached to it. And a lot of people teach boundaries in different ways, but I'm curious, when you hear the word boundaries, how do you feel like those are presented to you, or what do you think that looks like? Before we go into how I'm going to teach you, just pop them in the chat. Like what comes up for you when you hear the word setting boundaries or phrase setting boundaries? Stating when I'm uncomfortable or don't have time for something. I think of boundaries in relationships. Right, like not overstepping, giving space, etc. Communicating specifically what I need or want. A fence around my properties, or aka myself. I love that. We've been using so many like house analogies. I love it. Communicating how something is affecting you. Okay. Yeah. So at the end of the day, I hear a lot of communication, like stating, communicating specifically, right? Or I also create a lot of I see a lot of creating safety, right? Which is part of existing within ourselves, right? If we don't feel safe, we can create a boundary attached to that, right? That's a big part of why people pleasers struggle so much, is because we don't honor ourselves as important a lot of the time. So we allow, or are taught, that it's okay for others to step all over us, our needs, our wants, our desires, and for their stuff to be more important and for us to not even have a voice, right? And so we don't even know how to step into the concept of setting boundaries. And it becomes especially tough to start doing that when we've created patterns attached to people pleasing, especially when it comes to ourselves and the people that we are trying to build boundaries with. Because if somebody has the expectation that, well, you always say yes, or, you are going to always tell me everything about your life, and that's the relationship we built thus far, and now you're telling me that there is this whole aspect of your life that you no longer are comfortable expressing or talking to me about, right? Like that is very jarring for somebody on the receiving end, right? And it's also probably really challenging to be the one to step into that. So today we're going to talk about, from what you have been working on, how you want to start creating setting boundaries. And there's kind of two categories when it comes to boundary setting. I think most people see boundaries, and most of you talked about this, in the sense of somebody else, right? So stating something with someone else, boundaries in relationships, communicating what you need, right? That all involves another person. And that is a type of boundaries. They're called relational boundaries, right? So that's a category. Another category, though, are self-boundaries, right? Things that have solely to do with you that don't involve another person, right? So what I want you to do underneath the ones that you've already written out, all of the hows, I want you to separate into two categories, like draw a line down the middle. And I want you to put self and then relational at the top of each column. And if you have smaller pages, you can just do this on the second page, whatever works for you. And once you've done that, I want you to divide out the hows, the things that you struggle with from a people-pleasing standpoint, into things that you would identify as self and things that you would identify as relational. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that. And then if any of you have specific questions you're not sure about one, we can workshop that. Okay, once you've separated them out, give me your eyeballs. Interesting. Mel said that hers all fit in one category. Is it self or relational? Relational. All right, I see eyes. Okay, did anyone have anything that they were unsure of? If you did, unmute yourself. Okay, a few. Whoever wants to go first, unmute yourself.
Not asking for help and support. So like, because it almost doesn't matter who it is. So then I thought that meant that it's like a self thing, but it is also about like, depending on who it is, like, I don't know.
So you're telling me that the thing that you struggle with is not asking for help or support. Who is in the driver's seat of asking for that?
Me.
Correct. So I would identify that as a self boundary.
Okay.
And here's why. Yes, it may involve another person, but the boundary that you are setting and the choice around that action comes directly and solely from you.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Like I have to do the work internally
to get to the point of asking. And they can interact with that however they choose. But if you don't ask, you can't ever receive that support, right?
Right.
So that's a self thing. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Annie, you also raise your hand.
So I wasn't sure so I was questioning whether filling up my schedule with too many obligations is self or relational. I mean, I think it's self.
Have the same one.
Especially because I also put in like the relational, like putting other people before and like kind of like saying yes to things I don't want to do. So that feels more like relational. And so.
Why does saying yes to things you don't want to do feel relational?
Because it's usually contingent upon not wanting to disappoint somebody else.
But is that coming from you or is that interacting with another person?
Well, the choice to say yes comes from me.
Right, which means it's self.
Okay.
So do you see the difference? It's kind of a tricky line because a lot of the time we're setting boundaries and it involves other people, right? But there's a difference between I am choosing to not go to this party, right? I could say yes to this. I'm being invited, but I'm choosing to not go to this party because I'm tired and I'm setting that boundary with myself. I'm honoring what I need in this moment, but it has nothing to do really with anybody else other than my needs. Versus I am setting a boundary in a circumstance with my partner or whoever, right? I'm in a fight with my partner and they are very heightened and I am feeling unsafe in the moment and I need space. So I say, I'm going to take space now. I need you to respect that and give me 30 minutes alone. And I will text you when I'm ready to reconvene this conversation. That is a boundary that you are setting, but it is in relation to another person directly. Does that make sense? The difference? Okay. Heather and Jessica just moved all of theirs. It's important to know the difference, right? Because the verbiage then and the way that we attack boundaries completely shifts, right? Because when it has to do with our soul decisions, that is about self-trust. That is about like actually practicing that. Whereas the relational boundaries, yes, there is some clarity and knowing what we want in that space that we need to gain, but you've already gotten that step. That piece of it is about communication. It's about building a clear consent-based expression with whoever you are setting that boundary with, okay? Mine might be self too now. So, okay, anyone else have anything that you're like, I'm not sure? This is part of the workshop, so like feel free. There are no wrong answers here.
Mine were similar to Annie's. So like an example of one was like if it was a conversation about like politics or COVID or something like charged, I would just like agree with whatever the other person says, even though internally I'm like, that's stupid. Out loud, I was like, yeah, I could see that, or like, and so I was thinking that was relational, but now I don't know.
So that could be two things, right? So because it could be relational if you choose, if you're having that experience with somebody you spend a lot of time with and you want to alter the circumstance or the energy of your environment when you spend time with that person, right? If that's important enough to you and if that relationship is meaningful. I'm thinking like Christmas dinner with you know, family members and politics get brought up. You can have a conversation and set a boundary with your mom if she's the one who tends to bring up politics and say, hey mom, like, I understand this is important to you, but it makes me really uncomfortable to be a part of the dinner table, and I'm not going to attend this meal if politics are brought up. And so if they are, I am going to remove myself, right? And you can set that boundary, and that's a relational boundary versus, you know, you being like, if I'm in a crowded bar and these strangers or coworkers start talking about politics and I don't want to involve myself or agree or disagree, I'm just going to not say anything. Or if it bothers you enough, I'm going to, you know, go to the other side of the bar, or I'm going to leave and go home early. That is a self. Does that make sense? So it just kind of depends on like the circumstance within that. So some can kind of live in both worlds depending on where you feel that tends to live most in the people pleasing, your own people pleasing nature. Does that help?
Yeah, the second example was more of what I was going for, so I think that is self.
Yeah. Heather, did you unmute yourself?
Yeah, one of the ones that I wrote was emotionally regulating, which is something that I do a lot with like my family and a couple like close people to me. And I'm kind of confused because it's relational in the way that like I do it with people that are in my life a lot, but then also I'm the common factor. So I'm not really sure.
What do you mean by emotional regulating? Like, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so like anticipating people's emotions and like I guess kind of knowing where to meet them in the middle but without them having to say anything. So I'm like always juggling other people's emotions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that feels like you're people pleasing by feeling that?
By constantly changing my actions and my needs to like reflect that.
So that's a self thing.
Okay.
Because you're changing yourself in the context of other people. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay, perfect.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Everyone's okay? I hope everyone's okay, Mel. Okay, so I want you to now, and I know some of you have all in one category, which is, if that's the case, just pick two in that category. But I want you to star the most, the one you want to start working on the most in terms of your people-pleasing tendencies, one of each category. And again, if you have, you know, all of them in one category, star both of those. And we are going to do a workshop of some of these to give you some examples, hear other people's, and really get clear. Like we're going to write down a script for what you can say either to yourself or to a person if it's a relational thing that you want to work on, just to get the vernacular going, the understanding of how these work. Okay, so this is going to be whoever wants to get these done. So who has one that's a self boundary that they would like to work, that they starred? Go for it, Annie.
Putting others before myself.
Okay. So when does this tend to happen frequently in your life? Is this a daily thing? Like, does this happen in certain circumstances?
I think pretty much all the time.
Can you think of an example that happened recently?
Well, something I'm working through right now is whether or not to leave one of my jobs. And like the biggest reason for not, I want to leave because I'm not happy, but I'm torn because if I don't want to leave because I don't want to leave the kids behind. So I'm like putting their happiness ahead of mine.
So like if you were putting your happiness first, you would leave. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
That's a beautiful clarity piece. Especially given I was witnessing your video today that you did over the weekend for your thing from last week. So setting a boundary, generally speaking, in that space can look like a self-care tool. For example, it can be, before I make a decision, I am going to take 24 hours to contemplate what I most deeply want in the circumstance before I move forward. That could be a boundary you give with yourself, to just give yourself the breath and the space before saying yes or no attached to something, right? Does that feel like it would be in alignment with that particular?
Yes, I think so. And just, generally I'm working on just trying to find ways to give myself more confidence to even just entertain the idea, like what makes you happy, like.
Yeah.
So.
Well, what's something that helps you get more clarity around your needs and your wants?
I mean, journaling, definitely, I think. And time.
So what could be, obviously I give you an example, but what could be a boundary with those tools that you could implement for yourself around this particular how?
Maybe just like a boundary of, before making big decisions, remembering to use my tools like journaling and taking time and space. Even if I feel really confident, still going through those motions.
Yeah. So what would that sound like? If you're giving like a clear cut, I will.
So, well, I liked kind of what, like the 24 hours, but I will give myself, X amount of hours or days to check in with myself. And I will also utilize my tools of journaling or self-meditation, I guess, to increase my clarity of the situation.
Before taking any action.
Before taking action. And that also, I think a big piece for me is I will communicate that that's what I'm doing.
So that's relational.
Okay.
So this part that we just did, that I just typed, that you can now write down, that is yourself. I will give myself 24 hours or X amount of time to check in with myself and utilize my tools of journaling, self-meditation to increase my clarity before taking any action. The relational component of that is I will communicate that I will get back to them in X amount of time with my decision.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that.
Okay.
Do you see the difference?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Beautiful. All right. Who has a relational boundary that they would like to work on? Heather, go for it.
One that I wrote down was it's like stopping people if they are speaking in a mean way, or if I'm feeling gaslit in any way, stopping them and saying something, like, I will do that, like, this is making me uncomfortable. Something I've said before is, like, if you continue to speak to me this way, I'm going to have to disconnect, or I'm going to have to hang up, like something like that.
Yeah. I think that's beautiful. I also just want to reflect on her phrasing, because she said, this is making me uncomfortable, right? She expressed her feeling, right? It's kind of like the feeling, thought, reaction, action. It's similar in setting boundaries. When you're doing relational boundary setting, it can be really helpful to the person that and obviously you don't have to give them this gift, but if you're close to them, it can be really helpful to help them give them context for your ask. Because if you just say, I can't do this, I need to leave, it can be very, very jarring for the person on the receiving end. It can sometimes, cause breakage of bonds. Instead, right, she was like, I'm feeling very uncomfortable because the way that you're speaking to me, I'm receiving it as you're gaslighting me, and I don't appreciate that, and it really, really, really jars me. So if that continues, if that language continues, I am going to hang up. Mm-hmm. So not only did she express it from I am feeling this way and here's why, and sharing the context, she also did not put the boundary on the other person. That's a thing that most people do in relational boundaries, is like, you have to stop doing this. And a lot of people that teach boundaries, therapists, all sorts of people, they will give you examples like this. And I'm like, no, because you can't control other people's actions, reactions, or behavior. All you can control in these circumstances are your own, right? And if you're banking a boundary of yours on somebody else, you're not going to have that received. So what I love is that she immediately just said, I'm going to hang up or disconnect, because that's putting the power in her. She is not in the sidecar, right? She is in the steering wheel there. So she's in the steering wheel. She is steering the wheel. You guys knew what I meant. So that's beautiful. Okay. So let's get clear on the language that you would want to use in that particular circumstance.
So I am feeling uncomfortable because XYZ. If you continue to speak to me in this way, I'm going to have to hang up, or I'm going to have to leave.
Cool. Love that. Super clear. If you were to be on the receiving end, if all of you were to be on the receiving end of that, would you understand what would happen in that circumstance? It's very fucking clear. I love it. Cool. Thank you for sharing. All right. Someone else, you can pick. I wanted to make sure that we got at least a self and a relational to start, but so that we have those examples, but whoever would like to workshop one, go forth and unmute. Yeah, Brittany.
Okay. Mine I put under self. I use others' love languages to serve them. So
go for it.
I basically, like, whether or not that's something that is a natural reaction for me, I know that that's what speaks to them. So I'll kind of just use that to my advantage to kind of mitigate a situation.
Interesting. So can you give me an example of a time where you've done that and it's made you like uncomfortable, or it's made you feel like that wasn't really in alignment with yourself?
I know my ex-husband was complaining a lot that he didn't like my septum piercing. He said it ruined my face. So when he was expressing to me that he didn't like something, I knew all I had to do was be a little more sweet or lovey-dovey to him, because he was always really big on physical touch or quality time. So that way, if I just like put more of myself forth, maybe he'd forget about this ugliness that I got, versus, just addressing and being like, no, this is my body. This is what I wanted. I may have expressed it to him, but being able to give to him things that he needs, maybe he wouldn't focus so much on something with me.
So when you are met with something that is unfair or mean, you mask with that person's love language in order to diffuse the conflict.
Yes.
Am I okay?
Yeah.
That's so different than what you said at the beginning. Right? It's like using love language is to serve people is a beautiful thing. So I was like, okay, so like where is the meat? That's huge, because that is, while it is beautiful and while people teach that as a beautiful tool, and I believe it is at its core, you know, the reason behind it, the context is everything. So what would be a way that you can, because that circumstance is tough because it involves not just you, but also another person. There's kind of a self, no, but it's beautiful one. There's a self and there's also a relational component to that, right?
Yeah.
What is the boundary that you could implement from a self standpoint around the love languages piece?
I guess more or less if I feel like it's making me uncomfortable or like I'm disagreeing with something, at least address it, but maybe still use a love language in order to have it be received in a certain way.
What in what way are you wanting it to be received?
Well, instead of feeling like I'm being attacked necessarily or lash back about it, maybe because I know his love language was like physical touch or quality time, maybe take some time, sit down with him and talk to him. Like if he needs me to, like if he had needed me to hold his hand at that point in time, just being like, look, this is something, maybe addressing my issue with it while still serving their love language to where maybe they perceive it differently. It's so not like me attacking them back, but
yeah, I see this as two scenarios. Okay, so tell me if I'm totally off, but what I'm hearing is I'm receiving this in the moment and I do this to mask and I want to change that. Mm-hmm. Right? So that has nothing to do with your interaction with anybody, let alone your ex, right? So in that moment, something that you could do is say, I'm feeling very uncomfortable with the way that you're speaking to me right now. This is something that I love and is really meaningful to me. And I'm going to take space until you can be nice.
Okay.
That is something that removes you from the scenario and is fully, you know, in that particular situation.
Right.
With yourself, you could also say something along the lines of, I am going to sit with what I am receiving from the person and not act, kind of similar to what I said with Annie, and not act immediately with their love language so that I can understand how I actually feel about what I'm being given.
Okay.
Right? Instead of just immediately going to, you're upset, I'm going to fix this mode, right? It's how do I feel about what I'm being given before I take action? Right? So that boundary could sound something like, when I'm being met with conflict or I'm being told something that I don't like or doesn't resonate with me, I'm going to wait before I do anything. I'm going to sit with myself and contemplate on how I feel.
Okay. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I know I was writing, so I didn't type it out, but if you need me to afterwards, I totally can. The second thing in terms of the relational component is, you know, with somebody like your ex or somebody else, if you are ever in conflict and you feel upset about something, you could set a boundary with them where it says, if I'm ever upset about something, I am working on taking space to make sure I understand how I feel. And so I'm going to do that and communicate that to you in the moment. When I am in a place where I can come back, what I will do is I will come back to you. I will let you know why I felt the way I felt. And I will also be sure to utilize your love language because I know how much touch means to you. And so when I communicate whatever I'm struggling with or what I didn't like about that interaction, I will hold your hand. This is actually something that I do with my husband all the time, because when I get really upset about something he's said or done or an action, I close up and I need space, but he's a physical touch person. And so I've said, I will come back and I will like give you a hug and I will sit there with my hands. It will hold hands and I will look at you into your eyeballs and I will let you know why I was bothered and we will work through it together.
Okay.
As like a preemptive, like probably not in the moment boundary setting, but as a like, this is how I would love to establish conflict with you. And this is what I need. And I know this is what you need. And here's a way I feel like we can maybe compromise together. You know?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Cool. Awesome. Does anyone else want to go? We have 7 minutes.
I'll go. I think my biggest, like my most, relevant part right now is just kind of this feeling of like guilt and like feeling responsible and like feeling like I owe others, especially my family, either owe them in like what decisions I'm making, or at the very least like owe them what's the word, like explanation.
Yeah, like answers.
Like I have to defend my choices.
Yeah. And this, in terms of like boundary setting, did you put this under a self or relational for you? Because I feel like it could be either depending on the scenario.
I put it under self because I'm still kind of working around like exactly where that stems from. Like obviously, like I know kind of in general, but right now it's, I don't know, I've already kind of set that boundary kind of at the beginning of all of this with some of my family, that like I was gonna need some space right now. So they've done a pretty good job of respecting that.
Yeah.
Still checking in on me and still wanting to spend time with me, but they've done a good job of giving me space like in this area of my life. But yeah, it's just that residual like anxiety, like in trouble feeling. I don't know.
Do you feel like it takes action in a people pleasing thing, or is it just rooted in your feels?
I mean, I feel like it ends up being people pleasing because then it affects like, then I don't want to either tell anybody anything, or yeah, I like want to like just keep it to myself, or yeah, that's like
so
the
you
most of it.
Are you feeling like your fuck yes self would actually speak more about this? Is that what feels in alignment?
I don't know. I guess I want to be able to share my life freely. I don't know.
Yeah.
I go back and forth between like I am kind of a private person, but I also don't like to hide certain parts of myself. I think that if I felt more secure and comfortable to be myself, then I maybe wouldn't be such a private person. But I think part of why I am is I feel like I have to be.
Well, you have a lot of history of being taught that that's the only way to be. And also I feel like such a thread of yours through our time together has been hiding, and you've been unpacking that really intensely. So to me, it's not surprising that this is coming up. I'm just curious in terms of the boundary setting piece, if there's a way you can not hide but still be thoughtful with who you tell. So whether that is like, anything that comes up in my brain that I'm thinking about that feels in alignment with myself, I am going to write down this is my truth. Like I'm going to get a truth journal, and this is my truth journal where I will write all my fucking truths until I'm ready to share that. Or your boundary could be my sister that I'm really close to and that knows everything that's going on. She's going to be the person and the only person that right now I'm going to just pour into, and she's going to like be my rock, and I'm going to, have her be my family person that I share that with until I feel ready to come to, or until or if I feel ready to come to my family with the quote explanations. Right. To me, that's like a self, because you're deciding where your energy goes or how you might foster that sense of freedom and not hiding without stepping on your readiness for the interactions that will probably come from the conversations that might happen down the road.
Yeah.
So did either of those feel in alignment?
Yeah, and I've done that a little bit thus far, but like, yeah, definitely giving myself kind of an outlet for that, so I don't feel like I'm like hiding myself away and like doing things in secret, because I hate that feeling.
Totally.
But then I'm like going back and forth of this kind of new feeling of like I don't owe information about my life to anybody.
Yeah.
And kind
what a
of
concept.
balancing. And like, yeah, it literally is. Somebody, I think it was on TikTok, and somebody said like, to somebody else, like, have you told your parents that you're not religious or whatever? She was like, no. She's like, we don't really talk about it. She's like, I don't lie to my family if they ask me something about it. She was like, but I didn't really come out to them because it's not their business. Who cares?
Yeah.
I don't care.
You don't
and that
owe
like
anybody
blew my
anything.
mind.
Yeah. 1,000%.
I was like, what?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And like, thank you all for sharing these examples. I hope you all, why I wanted to workshop these is because they're so specific at the end of the day, boundary setting. And we could talk about boundaries forever. I want you to think this week if something comes up and you are like, I'm not sure how to set this boundary, or here's another thing that's coming up for me a lot that I want to be better about boundary setting. Let's workshop together in the Facebook group and also on Voxer if we're on there together. Because this is not just like a one moment thing, right? But I hope that by hearing each other, you were also able to be like, oh yeah, that's something I struggle with, and that's a way that I could word this, right? It's so many of these boundaries are things that we all struggle with at the end of the day, whether they're relational or self. And really, it's just about having the clarity that you've already built and being able to even say it to yourself, right? Saying those self things that I wrote down or that you've wrote down for yourself, say that out loud to yourself. Have the things in line, whether that's a truth journal, like we just talked about, have those tools ready so that when you are met with something that, forces you to set a boundary, you are able to do it without having to really think a lot, right? Because that's the thing. It's like we get into our feels and our thought and our reactions, and we take action from a reactive space instead of a thoughtfulness space, right? And taking that pause. For me, the thing I talked about with Annie of like, let's take 5 minutes before I say anything to this text. Or lately it's been like, let's wait 24 hours to say yes to going on a date because you're overbooked, girl. Like that's been my life lately. So it's like, and that's what I'm working on setting boundaries around because I've never dated before and this is very overwhelming for me, right? So it's like the time piece can be in and of itself like the biggest transformative thing. When I first started setting boundaries, it was like, I'm going to give myself 24 hours before I say yes to anything. And that was huge. It changed my life, right? It can be as simple as that. So let's focus on that this week. Please use the Facebook group and brainstorm with each other too, right? Like all of the boundaries suggestions that you were giving yourself, like, brainstorm with each other. Be like, oh, I understood that. I see that too. Like that's here's something I'm trying on for size. Like, let me know if it works for you, kind of a thing. And we'll work together as a community for all of you watching the recording as well. And I just saw your comment before we hop off. I just saw your comment, Heather. I'm glad that was supportive to you. Sometimes we are told by others that, it's harsh or unfair when we receive boundaries. It's because it says everything about them and nothing about you at the end of the day. People are very accustomed to getting their way and wanting things a certain way. And, it takes time for them to come around to the concept of you standing in your own, and either they will or they won't. So yeah, thank you all for being here. Let's unmute and take a community breath before we hop off for the night. Hands wherever feel good. And on the count of 3, we'll take a deep breath in and then release together. 1, 2, 3. Beautiful. Thank you all for being here, and I will see you in the Facebook group.
Bye.